Hello, and welcome to some Dodge family history. This is where I present information and research on my ancestors who served in the military during the early 20th century. Today, I will be presenting on the military service of Private First Class David Nemetzky, Hospital Corps, from his re-enlistment in March of 1911 to his discharge in March of 1914. We will use records that are available on Family Search, such as the bi-monthly muster rolls from November and December 1912 and forward, as well as troopship manifests that are available on Ancestry, in addition to National Archives records, such as special orders, bi-monthly muster rolls through September and October of 1912, and general court-martial records to tell the story of this chapter of his military service. This revised presentation also takes information from his physical examination papers from his re-enlistment in 1911 and hospital cards from his time in the Philippines and China. In 1973, a fire at the National Personnel Records Center destroyed between 16 and 18 million official military personnel files of Army enlisted personnel who were discharged between November 1st, 1912 and January 1st, 1960. Among those records that were destroyed was the official military personnel file for David Nemetzky. To help reconstruct these now lost personnel files, the bi-monthly muster rolls from November and December 1912 and onward were transferred from the National Archives in Washington, D.C. to the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, where they were microfilmed. In 2019, the bi-monthly muster rolls from November and December 1912 and forward through the end of 1939 were digitized and published on Family Search. Currently, 99 million names from these bi-monthly muster rolls have been indexed and are searchable on Family Search. However, the bi-monthly muster rolls from September and October 1912 and earlier are still housed at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and are available for research only by in-person visit. It was on my visits to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. in 2023 and 2024 where I was able to locate the bi-monthly muster rolls for the Hospital Corps and add these records to the now available bi-monthly muster rolls published on Family Search in order to put together as complete as possible the military record for David Nemetzky, especially for this chapter of his military service, where the records for his service are housed at two different locations. Following his discharge by purchase in September of 1909, David Nemetzky returned to his home and family in New York City and started a shirt manufacturing business with his brother in order to help provide for his parents and family. It appears that this business venture was short-lived. In March of 1911, he requested permission to re-enlist in the Army and to be assigned to the Hospital Corps. On March 28, 1911, his request was approved. This request was received at the Army recruiting station in Chicago, and he was forwarded to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, where he re-enlisted in the Army on March 30, 1911. While at Jefferson Barracks, he was assigned to the 27th Company of the General Service Infantry. He stated on his enlistment papers that his place of residence was Des Moines, Iowa, and that he worked as a laborer. According to his personal statement on his physical examination form, he worked in New York until February 14, 1911. He also stated that he was born on August 15, 1881. On April 4, 1911, David Nemetzky was assigned to the Hospital Corps and transferred back to Fort Wadsworth, New York for duty, arriving there 2 days later. Fort Wadsworth, New York is located on Staten Island, not far from his family in Lower Manhattan. The bi-monthly muster roll for July and August of 1911 indicate that Private Nemetzky was appointed as an acting cook from July 19th through July 31st. He was promoted to Private First Class on October 14, 1911. The complete handbook for the Hospital Corps of the U.S. Army indicates that privates of the Hospital Corps who have shown special proficiency may be recommended for promotion by the surgeon. It is likely that his previous experience in the Hospital Corps, as well as his previous promotion to Private First Class, played a part in his promotion. In November of 1911, he was given orders to report to Fort Ontario, New York, where he was attached to 2nd Battalion, 24th Infantry, for transfer to the Philippine Islands. He left Fort Wadsworth on November 24, 1911, and arrived at Fort Ontario the next day. He left Fort Ontario with 2nd Battalion, 24th Infantry on November 28, 1911, and traveled by rail to San Francisco, California, arriving there on December 4th. He was one of 30 Hospital Corps personnel that were assigned for overseas duty. Upon arrival at San Francisco, he boarded the U.S. Army transport Logan, which embarked to the Philippine Islands the next day, December 5th, and arrived at the Philippine Islands on New Year's Day, 1912. Private First Class Nemetzky, along with the other enlisted personnel from the Hospital Corps, were assigned to the Hospital Corps Casual Detachment at the Division Hospital in Manila on January 7, 1912. 4 days later, on January 11th, orders were given for the soldiers of the Hospital Corps Casual Detachment to report back to the Logan. They were assigned to the Hospital Corps Detachment at Tientsin, China, and were to set sail the next day. The evening of the 11th at 6:30 p.m., the Hospital Corps Detachment boarded the Logan, but knowing the ship would not sail until the next day, many stowed their gear and headed back to town to get one last entertaining evening before heading out to their assignment. As there appeared to be no direct orders to remain on the ship following boarding, in addition to there being no assigned duty to tend to, Private First Class Nemetzky did the same and followed his fellow soldiers back to Manila. He conferred with one of the sentries at the gangplank, who stated that to his knowledge, there was no order to remain on the ship and that he could leave. He stayed the night at the division hospital and returned to the port where the Logan was anchored around 8 a.m. the next morning, January 12th, and heard that the ship wouldn't leave until 5 o'clock that afternoon. He continued to check back during the morning and in the afternoon until it was too late. The Logan left port at 2:30 on the afternoon of January 12, 1912, bound for the port at Qinhuangdao, China, without Private First Class David Nemetzky aboard. He arrived back at the dock at nearly 3 o'clock to find that the ship had already left. He had, quite literally, missed the boat to China. He met a dock employee and offered to pay him $25 in gold to get a launch or tugboat to catch up with the Logan so that he could catch the ship. Unfortunately, the ship was too far out by that time. Had he arrived at the dock 10 or 15 minutes earlier, he could have done so, as there was another soldier who had missed the ship and was lucky enough to hire a small launch to get him aboard. As it was, Private First Class Nemetzky was left behind, his gear on its way to China without him. His gear included the following: a haversack or corpsman bag, canteen, 2 canteen and haversack straps, a meat can, knife, fork, spoon, tin cup, waist belt, hospital corps knife, and scalpel. As he had nowhere else to go, he reported back to the division hospital and explained his predicament. He was charged with AWOL and placed under arrest. While under arrest, he did duty at the division hospital in Manila while waiting for a general court-martial to be convened. The general court-martial was held on March 18, 1912, at the Cuartel de España in Manila. He was charged with AWOL and conduct to the prejudice of good order and military discipline for failing to remain on board the transport Logan and being absent from the time of boarding to the time of sailing of the Logan. He pled not guilty to the charges. At the court-martial, he explained the circumstances of his going AWOL. We put our clothes and equipment aboard, had telescope cases that we could put our clothes in. I had a full field equipment with me and put that on board. Every one of the detachment that I could hear, each one would ask the other, "Where are you going?" And he would say, "I'm going downtown." And that is the general remarks I heard, and as is usual, I also took the privilege. I also noticed that I wasn't the only one. In fact, I can safely say that most of the detachment left the boat that evening. Every one of them seemed to think that the boat wouldn't sail that day, but I went down to the boat about 6 times during the morning and until 3 o'clock to find out when the boat would sail, and my impression was, so far as I could find out, that she would sail at 4:30 or 5 o'clock that afternoon. I intended to find out 3 hours' time before the boat sailed, but it seems I was misinformed. I certainly did not want to miss the boat, didn't want to take a chance like that. Of course, it has proven to be a chance. Private First Class David Nemetzky was found of AWOL and misconduct and sentenced to 4 months' imprisonment at hard labor at Cuartel de España and to forfeit $10 per month for the same period. However, in his explanation of the circumstances, there appears to have been a miscommunication regarding the sailing time of the Logan, and because of these circumstances, his sentence was reduced to 2 months' imprisonment and forfeiture of $10 per month. His imprisonment began at the Cuartel de España on April 9, 1912. While imprisoned, he contracted dengue fever and was hospitalized from April 29th to May 4th. The bimonthly muster roll for the hospital corps at Cuartel de España for May and June of 1912 record that he was released from confinement on May 6, 1912, after only 1 month of imprisonment. He still was expected, though, to forfeit the $10 for each of the 2 months that he was to be imprisoned. Following his release from imprisonment, he returned to the Hospital Corps Casual Detachment at the Division Hospital at Manila. Special Order 121 from Headquarters Philippines Department was issued on May 22, 1912, which stated that he was to be sent by the first government transport to Tientsin, China for duty, and that this journey is necessary for the public service. He left Manila on June 20th, 1912, and reported for duty at Tientsin on June 26th. From the book U.S. Armed Forces in China, 1856 through 1941, we read, in early January 1912, the U.S. War Department ordered the transport Logan with the 1st Battalion and Machine Gun Platoon of the 15th U.S. Infantry to sail from the Philippines, and the unit arrived at Chinwangtao on January 18th. They were dispersed at important stations, bridges, and other key points along the railway from Tientsin. The 15th Infantry would remain in China until 1938. Private First Class David Nemetzky's role in supporting the Army's role in China certainly appears to have been a small one, but no doubt it was an important one. He was sick at quarters in Tientsin from June 27 through July 4th with periostitis or inflammation in his left index finger. After he had recovered from this affliction, he was assigned to duty at the hospital in Tientsin. In addition to hospital corps duty in Tientsin, he was also assigned to detached service in China. On August 15, 1912, he was ordered to Wali, China, on the outskirts of Beijing, some 80 miles away from Tientsin, for duty. He was stationed at Wali until November 8, 1912, when he was ordered to Kuye, China, about 110 miles northeast from Tientsin. He returned to Tientsin on January 4, 1913. On June 22, 1913, he was assigned to Kaiping, China, 1,400 miles south of Tientsin and less than 100 miles from Hong Kong, arriving there 2 days later. He would again return to Tientsin on September 2, 1913. At the end of 1913, Private First Class Nemetzky received orders to return to the United States via the Philippines for discharge. He left China on January 4, 1914, and arrived back at Manila on the 15th of January. He was assigned to duty at Fort William McKinley until the Army troopship Logan had arrived at Manila and was ready for return to the States. On February 15, 1914, safely back aboard the Army transport Logan, Private First Class David Nemetzky was on his way back to the United States. He arrived at Fort McDowell, California on March 16, 1914, remaining there until his honorable discharge on March 24, 1914. The muster roll for Fort McDowell, California for March of 1914 contains a final statement for Private First Class David Nemetzky and states that he was honorably discharged per ETS, or expiration of term of service. Short remaining term, 5 days, waived for the convenience of the government. No AWOL, despite his general court-martial conviction of being AWOL 2 years earlier. Character, excellent. Service, honest and faithful. Following his honorable discharge, he remained in California and re-enlisted in the Army at Fort McDowell, California on April 11, 1914. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation and found it informative. The National Personnel Records Center fire in 1973 caused the bi-monthly muster rolls to be separated and housed at different facilities, as those from November and December of 1912 forward were moved to St. Louis in order to make possible the reconstruction of many of the Army enlisted personnel files that were destroyed. My trips to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. in 2023 and 2024, searching through the bi-monthly muster rolls through September and October of 1912 that are housed there, and connecting them to the bi-monthly muster rolls for November and December of 1912 forward that are available on a family search, make presenting a continuous picture of his military service possible. The next presentation will look at his re-enlistment and service in the Hospital Corps from 1914 through 1917. Thank you.